As I look at the future, right, our innovations are focused in these areas. How do we use data? How do we use AI? How do we use machine learning? How do we use what I call institutional knowledge to make decisions as opposed to individual brilliance to make decisions, right? Because as the workforce ages, a lot of that individual experience and brilliance will be lost. It's important that you capture that as quickly as you can today so that it becomes institutional experience and institutional decision making.
That's Rohit Verma, CEO of Crawford Company, and this is the future of insurance. This episode is brought to you by Medallia, the market leader in customer and employee experience. Their award-winning SaaS platform, Medallia Experience Cloud, makes all your other applications customer and employee aware. Medallia uses proprietary AI and machine learning to reveal predictive insights that drive powerful business actions and outcomes. Leading insurers like Prudential and Zurich use Medallia to reduce churn, turn detractors into promoters, create in-the-moment cross-sell and upsell opportunities, and drive revenue-impacting business decisions. Learn more at Medallia.com. And the Future of Insurance book series, available exclusively from Amazon or at future-of-insurance.com.
Rohit Verma, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure.
We've had the pleasure of getting to know each other a bit. You've bought me lunch before, which was very nice of you. But I also got to see some of the things that you were doing at Crawford, some of the ways that the company was placing bets, to be honest, on where the industry was heading. And we were saying before recording, pre-COVID. So those were interesting technologies, a bit of foresight, and then suddenly front and center with just how soon and how important a lot of those investments became. I wonder if you can give people a bit of that sense of, in the adjusting world, in the claims world, the shift that went on last year. It's something we talk about so much, but you guys live it, at the coalface every moment.
Yep. Yep. Look, we have long believed we are an 80-year-old company, as you know, and I've spent quite a bit of time in underwriting and distribution, in strategy and finance across various functions of insurance. And I've always felt that we're such a traditional industry, we're such a people-based industry, we're such a process-oriented industry and a regulated industry. So it's, for some people, it feels like to reimagine this industry is really hard. Right. But I think what you're seeing today in the marketplace, whether it's in distribution, whether it's in underwriting or in claims, every aspect of the business is being rethought and reimagined. And I think any organization that is not only proud of its 10-year, 50-year, or 80-year-old history, but wants to create a future legacy for themselves has to reimagine the business. And that's what we've been doing. We've been reimagining how claims should be done. And even pre-COVID, we thought that the whole process of making sure that for every single claim of every single value, does it require the same level of intensity of process? That should be really rethought because today people can get on their phone and order a car very easily. So why should that be any different for them to request a policy or request a claim being handled? And that's the reason why we started that process a while back.
It's right sizing the delivery, but you need the tools to do that, and we
Correct.
generally haven't had them. The tool was the person who was sent out to then figure out how much of their time to spend on something.
Yeah. Well, look, claim is the process or the point of process, which is the moment of truth for insurance. When you buy a policy, all you're doing is you're buying a promise that when there's a problem, you'll be there for me. So, claim becomes such an important and integral part of the entire insurance process that if that aspect is not made the most efficient or is made the most effective, then are you really delivering the value proposition that was promised to the customer?
Yeah.
So investing in that, I think, for any insurance company or any insurance service provider company is extremely important. But today there are so many capital allocation needs that it becomes hard. So if I'm a carrier and say I'm a small to mid-sized carrier, and I prioritize on what I need to do in terms of my regulatory reporting, what I need to do in terms of distribution, in terms of building a better underwriting platform, it becomes hard to take that capital and allocate it equally across all those places. And I do think that sometimes claims gets um, I don't want to use the word neglected because I think it's too strong, but I would just say it's probably not the number one priority. And distribution and underwriting tend to be the higher priority, or regulation or regulatory needs tend to be the higher priority. So, we are only in the business of claims. And so we prioritize the investment on the claim side. And that's the reason why we place these bets, whether these bets were on how we were leveraging data to create insight, or bets that we were making on how do we shorten the last mile, right? Which is the last mile, meaning from where you are, where the claim is actually being processed, to actually where the claims actually happen, right? So if you think about that as a last mile, how do we actually shorten that last mile and make it more efficient? And that's really where the bulk of our investment has been. Enable the policyholder, enable the claims manager sitting at a carrier, or the risk manager, and then enable the adjuster, right? Those are the three key stakeholders that we have to think about enabling.
Yeah, it's interesting in 2020 the conversation suddenly focused on claims so much because plenty of new business conversation as well, but in claims you had to figure out how to deliver it because you couldn't the way you've been doing it. And it seems like investment in claims came alive in the industry. The question I have now is it like, okay, we did it, now we're done, which is kind of what happened a few years ago. Claims got a new system and then we're done. Or did this awaken a new thought on claims that, what, actually this is an ongoing investment. Customer experience matters here. Systems, tools matter. Do you think is it one or the other? Is it a mix? Do you think the industry reawakened to claims needing investment?
I think it's going to be a mix. I don't think it's all or nothing. I do think that there are some parts of the business that have changed forever. If you looked at self-service, if that was for certain parts of the industry, if that was 10% and jumped up to 70 or 80, I think it's going to stay there, or
Yeah.
maybe come down just a few notches, but it's not coming back down to the 10 to 20% uptake that you saw in some aspects of the business earlier. So I think those things will change. I do think that the whole customer experience journey is so important. The human contact is so important that you were able to justify not being there because of COVID, but you would not be able to do that once COVID is over. And
Mm.
once we return back to normal, whatever that normal is, if I'm in a house and the roof has been blown away by a tornado, and I just get a phone call which says, "Can you take pictures of your roof?" Or someone, there's a drone flying up there that you can't see that is taking pictures of your roof and will be back to you. I don't know if I get the same level of comfort that, oh,
Yeah.
someone's actually looked at it and something's being done, versus there's someone who comes to me who says, "Look, I understand what's happened. Mr. Verma, your roof is gone, but you're covered. Someone will be actually, we're happy to send you a contractor who can actually repair your roof and put a new roof, or I'll be very quick to write up an estimate and make sure that you get the check so that you can get your roof repaired." That is a comforting conversation that I, as a policyholder, I, as a claimant who's just gone through probably one of the most terrible days of my life, want to see some empathy, right? What I don't want is a phone call that says, "Hey, we've got a drone flying up your house. They're taking a picture and we'll get you stuff." It just, that, today, again, I can explain that. I can say, okay, because of COVID, I've got to live with that. But after
Mm.
COVID, I would expect that person to be at my door.
Yeah, reassurance is part of the product. It's not just the financial.
That's
Is
right.
Are there things that, I mean, again, going back to pre-COVID and some of the investments that Crawford had made, are there things that are brewing today that might change some of that or allow for not just in times like COVID where we can do things more remotely, to be more efficient and to be more expeditious in resolving the matter, not waiting to get someone out there, because we're still going to have surge events. We're still going to, like the South was dealing with, where
Yeah.
even if you had boots on the ground and people were comfortable with those boots coming into their homes,
Yeah.
it's still hard to get around. There's still too much demand.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of make it so that we can reassure while being remote? Is that
Well,
still a
yeah,
key?
I think it is, and not completely remote, but do you need to send the same level of expertise to every location? I think you can actually modulate that and pull the dial forward or dial back depending on what it is. So just to give you an example, if you had an adjuster today who was visiting a house where, let's say, the siding was damaged or the fascia was damaged, you would have that adjuster go and take measurements. Even if they use some kind of electronic tools for measurements, it'll probably take them a couple of hours
Yeah.
to do that correctly. We're now employing a 3D modeling tool, which is commercially available. We're now employing that tool and giving that to not just our adjusters, but also our lookers, also our ladder assist individuals who go in, take about 10 or 12 pictures, which could probably take them 15 to 20 minutes. And it then renders a complete 3D model with complete with measurements and facades for us to then review, right? So then they've done that. The actual, like a high-end adjuster sitting at a desk in Atlanta or Chicago or New York or wherever they're sitting can actually look at it and say, okay, this is what happened in Dallas. A hailstorm went by or a tornado went through, and this was the damage that was created, and they can actually look at that damage and do the estimate, right?
Yeah.
But there is still someone who is there at the location, taking the pictures, reassuring the policyholder, having a conversation with the policyholder. So the policyholder feels like, okay, something's really going on, and you have an expert who's there. You know, when Harvey, Irma, and Maria happened, or for that matter, when Laura happened in the more recent past, and you try to get everybody there, it's hard to get everybody there because you don't have proper facilities for adjusters to go down there and live there. Many of the adjusters in the industry actually have their own campers. A lot of people don't know that, but they actually drive their campers to the nearest RV sort of park the RV there, then they take their truck and drive around and then come back in the evening and go back to their RV. So there's a real challenge in getting people out at the location, right? That's one. Second, there's just a dearth of people. You don't have individuals that are graduating colleges today who are saying, I really want to be a catastrophe loss adjuster. Or you have people who are not trained enough. So sometimes people think that there's going to be disruption that'll be caused by technology. I think there'll be more disruption caused by lack of people in the short term.
Yeah.
And this, by really having the ability to say, okay, we're going to have some people who are going to go take these pictures or go take this video and and the measurements will be done automatically. You have a more skilled individual, right, that is sitting at a center or a center of excellence where they can actually be writing estimates, doing the adjusting, and doing what I call the higher end work.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, this conversation reminds me of like 2015, the first Connected Claims Conference. They had it was in person back when those things happened.
Yeah.
They had a big screen where you could use your mobile device to submit a question for the open Q&A for all the panels. And every single panel, it didn't matter what they were talking about. A lot of the people in the audience were either field adjusters or had been in recent past. And every single panel, the questions were all basically, how much longer before I don't get to exist anymore?
Yeah.
How much until we're all put out of the job by drones were, big conversation point back then. I mean, it didn't make any difference what the panel was on. That's all people were asking. It's a little bit embarrassing, actually. Fast forward now, almost 6 years. This November will be 6 years since that particular Connected Claims. It's different, right? It's not the technology's there. Yet what you're describing is not a case where the people are taken out of the equation.
Yeah. I don't
completely
think,
or otherwise.
Yeah, I don't think honestly that you can take people out of the equation. Now, somebody is driving, getting out of my driveway, backs onto my mailbox, and my mailbox gets broken. I think you can take people out of that equation, right? I really do believe that you can say, take a picture of that, send that picture over, your policy covers it, it's within the deductible, you move it fast, you don't have to send someone there. But I think when you still talk about what's happening in Texas today, where you've got water coming out of the ceilings, it's going to be, you can't take people out of that equation. So I always, a lot of adjusters, as you can imagine, when I have a town hall or something, ask me, so are we going to, we're doing all this innovation, we're talking about reimagining, does that, in your reimagined future, does the adjuster go away? And I'm like, no, quite the contrary. In my reimagined future, the adjuster does not go away. And I believe that the adjuster has to have deeper skills around empathy and communication and relationship building, as opposed to just knowing the nuts and bolts of actually adjusting a claim. So I think the skill set level, frankly, goes up. The technical capability gets augmented with technology,
Yeah.
but the skill set of human interaction actually has to be even further improved.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's just striking me as you're saying this. It's like that whole conversation of, does the adjuster's job go away? Forgets the fact that it's not just about the tools you're using to adjust. It also matters about the situation, the severity, NatCat, etc.
Yeah,
It's not like they're staying consistent, or when the conversation about autonomous vehicles, that's about reducing injuries and accidents. So you may still have severity, but you'll have fewer events. You can miss more of those collisions.
yeah,
There's no analog in the home. All
yeah,
the IoT in your house under the sun is not going to stop lightning
yeah.
from striking, trees from falling, wind from blowing, and water from coming down or
Exactly
coming
right.
up. Um,
Exactly. And again, I don't know what your political beliefs are, or what the listeners that you have, their political beliefs are, but I do believe that the weather is becoming extreme, right?
yeah,
So what happened in Texas is unheard of.
yeah,
I mean, the kind of damage that we're seeing, I mean, we've got close to 1,000 people mobilized right now. That the extent of damage of reports that I'm hearing from people is absolutely heartrending.
yeah. It is crazy, and there's nowhere to go because the hotels are either at capacity or shut down as well. I mean, maybe they're
Right.
starting to come back, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's catastrophic,
Yeah.
literally, um, and no preparation for it.
No, I would readily tell you that, I mean, in our industry, which is supposed to be ready for these kind of events, we don't expect events of this magnitude, right? Where practically every other home and every other office building has some form of a claim. I mean, literally, that's the kind of reports that I'm hearing.
Yeah,
You're just not prepared for that. That's supposed to happen in June, July, August, when the wind starts to blow.
that's a good point. So even if we did have capacity for these surge events, it's not timed for right now, and it's not for these types of losses.
That's correct.
So, I mean,
That's correct.
streets were impassable because of ice and trees that
Ice.
had fallen. That's a big
Yep.
problem too. Yeah.
Yep.
No, I mean, I think to your point, it's moments like this that reinforce it's the disruption is not the technology, it's the staffing.
Yes. Having trained people available who not only are good technically, but more importantly, have the empathy, right? Our
Yeah.
purpose is to restore and enhance lives, businesses, and communities. Um, I believe that's the purpose of everybody in the industry, right?
Yeah.
That's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
So I just don't know how you deliver on that purpose without having people who have empathy.
Yeah. And to your mailbox example, so if all of those types of claims go away from a human adjusting standpoint, I'm sure that that's not generally what those field adjusters love adjusting. To fight food traffic for an hour or two,
Yeah,
to take a picture of a down mailbox or a broken window,
yeah,
and then leave to fight through traffic
right,
again. That's not making use of their skills
right,
either.
right. And look, if you look at what's happening in the industry, that the complexity of the claims is going up.
Yeah,
Yeah, just think about it, right? How complex the systems are in a building today. I mean,
yeah,
it's no longer just a structure. There are lots of devices, sensors installed in buildings, machinery. Particularly if you have green buildings, they have new specialized kind of air conditioning.
hmm,
Sort of whole machining is different. So the world's definitely becoming more complex. The whole liability situation is becoming more complex. If one of the autonomous cars gets into an accident, whose fault is it, right? I
yeah.
mean, there are
It's
lots of
product
cars get into an
liability now,
accident, but what makes it to the Wall Street Journal is when an autonomous car has an
right?
accident, right? It's so the liability is becoming very tough. I still remember the unfortunate incident that happened in Vegas where
Yeah,
they were shooting out from a hotel building. So the shooter was in the hotel building. The park where the shooting happened was managed by company. Another company was managing the actual concert. And I haven't followed the case close enough to know, but where do you allocate the liability of that, right?
Yeah, I was on the inside of that
Oh, you
claim,
were,
so
okay.
yeah, it's really complicated. And so look, you talk about the severities changing. That's a situation where you look at, as the event organizer or the security coordinator,
Mhm.
whatever, you look at what are the logistics we need to think about of things going wrong. Generally, it's about ingress. So we have to
Mhm.
keep the bad people from getting in, whether it's people who are, don't have tickets and they're cheating on entering, or someone
Yeah,
nefarious or
yeah,
malicious, right? What you don't contemplate is how do we get everyone out as quickly as possible, right? You're
yeah,
trying to lock the situation down from the baddies coming in.
right.
And that was part of the problem there is egress. And it's the same thing in stadiums, and
Yeah,
it's, so we plan for the hurricane season in the South. We don't plan for winter.
yeah,
And so it ends up being, maybe we'll also have a bad hurricane season. We certainly had an active one last season, but
yeah,
there wasn't capacity on the standby. Like, there's people who drive down to the Gulf Coast area and just camp there to do adjusting for the season because there's going to be business.
yeah,
No one's doing that in the winter.
yep.
I had to pay a bunch of condo roof claims in
Uh-huh,
Minnesota in the middle of
uh-huh,
July for hail.
uh-huh.
And I was like, once we got out of winter, I was like, okay, we're good now. We're not going to get any more, hail in the middle of the summer,
Yeah,
hailing in Minnesota.
yeah,
And I suppose if you're from Minnesota, that doesn't sound shocking, but for me, that was a surprise. I wasn't prepared to deal with those claims.
yeah. And I don't have, Brian, numbers committed to memory, but just conceptually, if I can tell you, the last 10 years, and you probably already know this better than I do, last 10 years, the catastrophe have been much higher.
Yeah.
Catastrophe losses have been much higher. The prior decade, and then that decade was bigger than the prior decade. So I
Yeah.
think some
It's
of
not
these
just
things were,
inflation.
sorry,
It's not just because of inflation.
it's not because of
Yeah.
inflation. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, look, we had more named storms than recorded history this past season.
right.
You mentioned the him storms, Harvey, Irma, Maria.
Yeah,
You had back to back record setting Atlantic windstorms. Harvey, worst storm, most powerful storm ever recorded in the Atlantic, followed by the worst, most powerful storm ever recorded in the Atlantic.
yeah,
So two like 1 in 500 year events back to
right,
back in the same year.
right.
This is not it's not normal.
Yeah, it isn't, and that's why I do believe that I think that a lot of organizations are spending time thinking about what their claims approach is going to be, what their claims approach will be to surge, because again, if I go back to the majority of the insurance companies, right, 70% of the insurance companies in the U.S. Have less than $1 billion in premium.
Yeah,
So if you think about those insurance carriers, how do they really plan for this kind of activity? How do they invest for this becomes really hard,
yeah,
and frankly, that's where we believe we play a very important role.
yeah. No, it's a good point. I mean, it's a way to not amortize, but spread the investment in your ability to respond.
Mhm.
I want to close with a little bit of future telling, if you will. Going back to that time I got to come in and see some of the investments you guys had made and how you were tying them together, like WeGo Look, like some of the
Mhm.
drone
Mhm.
technology and adjusting technology to, I mean, even down to the scheduling technology of your resources, which I think a lot of us forget how you manage and deploy and see the availability and access to your resources is critical, not just in these surge moments, but on a day-to-day basis. To me, there was a lot of forethought in that and the way that you brought it together. What are some of the things that you're doing today that are equally on that sort of, this is where we see it's going, so these are the seeds that we're planting? What
Um,
you're able to share. Obviously,
yeah,
there may
yeah,
be
no,
things you
and
can't
I'm
talk about.
and I'm not pausing because I'm just trying to make sure that I help it in a way that that there'll be connection between what your listeners or viewers um, may be thinking about, right? So today, let's talk about where the complexity is.
Yeah,
The complexity is in making a decision of what's the right kind of resource to send to inspect, as an example, right? So the method of inspection becomes really important. The second is what's the most efficient way to dispatch to that method of inspection and get the end product back from there, right? Um, so I think there is some play there. uh, there's a lot of time and money that gets spent in reviewing claims. So, hey, you had an IA, let's say, go through the work, or for that matter, your own adjuster go through the work. So, actually spending a lot of time in actually reviewing that. If I switch to the more casualty side of the business, it's about identifying which claims potentially can have a nuclear verdict as early in the process as possible. It's about managing the injury of an injured worker or of a claimant and helping them sort of get back or get their life restored. So as I look at the future, right, our innovations are focused in these areas. And those innovations, again, go back to how do we use data? How do we use AI? How do we use machine learning? How do we use what I call institutional knowledge to make decisions as opposed to individual brilliance to make decisions, right? Because as the workforce ages and gets a well-deserved retirement, a lot of that knowledge is going to be lost. A lot of that individual experience and brilliance will be lost. And it's important that you capture that as quickly as you can today and invest it so that it becomes institutional judgment, it becomes institutional experience and institutional decision making. That wasn't possible 20 years ago, or maybe if it were, it was very expensive. Today, you can do that with AI and machine learning, and that's what we're trying to pitch towards.
And you have so much data across so many different situations. You can feed that because ML needs data.
Correct.
AI needs data. So you can feed that in a way
Yeah.
that probably most carriers, if not any, would be able to come close to and much faster.
Well, I would say that our experience has been when we've used machine learning that we can get to 65 or 70% really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but that last 20 to 35% is a very, very tough last 20 to 35.
Mm.
So we still believe, again, even if you have AI and ML, that human intervention is going to be really important. So as an example, as we're building one of our platforms, which is going to allow us to do intelligent triage, we're still going to allow the adjuster to override that. So it's not going to be like, claim comes in and we triage it sort of what I say to the team, automagically. We still will have to have some intervention because I just don't think you can do that, right? You have someone who is not technology literate, who is not comfortable, or God forbid are handicapped and can't use self-service. Your model will say use self-service
Yeah.
because the model only knows so much.
Yeah.
But you will again need that human being who's empathetic, who says, you know what, the claimant here is potentially in a wheelchair. I'm not going to have them send a link and say, why don't you go around your house and take a picture?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, you have to read the situation and respond as a human, and maybe one day machines will get there or get closer, but probably
Yeah.
never fully.
Yeah.
So it's an input. It's a management decision input. It's not the final say.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, well, I'm excited to see what you guys do next because I was blown away. And I think when I told non-insurance people, like I told my wife that night, and she's like, "Uh huh." Like, no, you don't understand. This is really cool watching this all come together.
Well, Brian, one thing I would tell you is never discuss business with your spouse. It's not always helpful,
Yeah,
especially if it's insurance.
I'm trying to keep the bar low with her so that every now and then I can surprise her positively, but she doesn't expect it. That's the strategy. Right, really, really interesting, and good to catch up with you again.
Same here.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you to Rohit. That's great perspective to get because, as I mentioned, like as long as I've been in the claims world, this has been front and center. This notion that everyone's going to be gone. It's all going to be drones and AI models and all that. And I think, for Rohit, you could say, well, for Crawford, there's an obvious advantage to that. It makes them super efficient and scalable, and they've got great technology already. So why not? But then you hear his take, and there's a very clear place for adjusters, for people in all this. And to be honest, like that's what we've been seeing. So that upfront fear, while understandable, that's just not what's played out. And so instead, it's a notion of, well, how do we embrace that technology to support our people?
because claims, especially in the property world, there are some really serious situations that go on that you need someone there. You need someone on the ground. You need someone directing things. You need someone looking and seeing and feeling and investigating firsthand. I've seen some of the things that Crawford does, and the investigations in a burnt out building. Like, that's really difficult, and it takes, it's like you see in crime scene investigations and TV shows and the movies, like people gently moving things around and trying to figure out what's going on and really getting in there. And you can't just fly overhead and get that done. And models aren't going to dig into some of those aspects and complications that are happening in very minute, micro kind of places that you need to get there firsthand. And that's before you even think about the human side of it. If you're seeing someone whose life was just destroyed, you need to console them. You need to be there for them and show them how you are standing by them, because that's what people need. So really, it's a balance. And I think Rohit spoke to that beautifully. So thank you to Rohit and to Crawford for his time, for coming on the show. Thank you to Medallia for supporting this episode and making it all possible. And of course, always thank you to you for tuning in. I hope that this is useful, valuable, insightful, educational, and sparking something in you kind of content that you want to keep engaging in and to share around with those you care about in the industry, because that's how we all come together and move things forward, so we can stand by people at those worst moments of their lives when they need us most. All right, I will come back to you next time with another great episode, and look forward to sharing that with you guys soon. Thanks.